This year's Black History theme, African Americans in Times of War, focuses on the roles of African Americans in every American war, from the Revolutionary War to the current war against terrorism. This theme is filled with paradoxes of valor and defeat, of civil rights opportunities and setbacks, and of struggles both abroad and at home. The myriad of issues facing African Americans in times of war include a lack of opportunities, the struggle to integrate the military during times of segregation, and the experiences of veterans upon their return home. We'll not only uncover the impact of war on men and women of color in uniform, but also the impact these diverse stories had on the larger African American community. Today we look at some African American heroes of the Civil War. The Civil War was fought between 1861 and 1865 and had multiple causes including sectionalism and differing views of states' rights. As the country began to expand westward, the issue of the extension of slavery to new territories arose. Though compromises were made in an attempt to ease the tensions plaguing the nation, over time they started to break down as riots erupted and violence began to spread across the country. After the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1861, South Carolina seceded, along with 6 other states, to form the Confederate States of America, and the war began. The Civil War didn't become a fight over the moral implications of slavery until President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862, freeing all the slaves in those states still in rebellion on January 1, 1863. Though the Emancipation Proclamation didn't abolish slavery, it paved the way for African Americans to fight in the Union Army. And fight they did. Robert Smalls. Born into slavery, Robert Smalls worked as a pilot in the harbor at Charleston. When the Civil War broke out, Robert was assigned to steer the CSS Planter, an armed Confederate military transport. First, he stole the boat while the Planter's officers were ashore sleeping. Disguising himself as the captain and giving the correct secret signals, he successfully sailed the Planter past 5 Confederate forts that guarded the port. He then surrendered the ship, as well as a code book, to the Union vessels that were forming a blockade. The Union commander at Port Royal, rightly impressed, sent Smalls to see President Lincoln, who he persuaded to allow African Americans into the Union Army. Smalls was also given command of his own vessel, now in the Union service, making him the first black naval captain of the war. He deactivated mines that he had helped to plant as a slave and assisted in the destruction of railroad bridges. To top it off, he later became a congressman. William A. Jackson. Despite being a slave when the Civil War broke out, William Jackson was in a position of power which he fully exploited. As a slave in the home of Confederate President Jefferson Davis, William was perfectly placed to become a spy for the Union. The loudmouth Davis saw Jackson as a piece of furniture rather than a possible enemy agent. As his coachman, Jackson risked his own life to listen in to conversations between the president and important members of the Army. When Jackson fled across enemy lines in late 1861, he was able to give the Union valuable information about supply routes, military strategies, and Confederate supply shortages. William H. Carney. Escaping slavery as a child through the Underground Railroad, William Carney joined the Union Army at the first opportunity. During the Battle of Fort Wagner, his regiment spearheaded a charge across the beach into withering enemy fire. When the color sergeant dropped, Carney picked up the flag and moved to the front of the charge. After the Union took the walls, Carney found himself alone and was shot twice. Forced to leave the wounded, he joined up with an advancing regiment where he was hit a 3rd time. After being escorted to a field hospital, Carney passed off the flag to another member of the 54th. It was then that it became apparent that William Carney had been holding the flag the entire time, not letting it touch the ground once. For his heroism, he became the first African American to earn the Medal of Honor. Alexander Thomas Augusta. Alexander Augusta wasn't a hero for facing down the barrel of a musket, but for the determination he showed in the face of oppression as a surgeon in the Union Army. Born to free parents in 1825, he enrolled as a medical student in 1850. In 1861, he enrolled, becoming the first African American physician out of the 8 that would sign up for duty. He rose to the rank of major, making him the highest ranking African American at the time. Despite saving lives, Alexander was attacked by mobs in both Baltimore and Washington. 2 Union assistant surgeons also complained to President Lincoln about having to report to an African American, forcing Augusta to be transferred to Washington. Despite the prejudice he faced, Alexander continued to serve as a surgeon until the end of the war, using his position to fight for Black rights